Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. People who used to not believe in ghosts but do now. What experience changed your mind? Story 1. Unseen Forces.
I grew up in a very scientific family. Ghosts were never a topic of discussion, and I never knew my father's stance on the supernatural. One evening during high school, curiosity got the better of me, and over dinner I asked my father about the house we lived in when I was a baby. What he told me has haunted me ever since. When we first moved into that house, everything seemed normal, until the gifts started appearing. My father said it began one week after we moved in. Every Friday morning, a handcrafted item would mysteriously appear on the mantel of our fireplace. No one had keys to the house but us, and the previous owner had moved out of state. My father, ever the rational engineer, reported the occurrences to the police. They patrolled our property every Friday night, hoping to catch an intruder, but found nothing. Yet, like clockwork, the gifts kept coming. Helpless and unnerved, my father finally turned to the local church. He was not a believer in the paranormal, but desperation drove him to have a priest bless the house. After the blessing, the gifts stopped. What chills me to this day is how serious my father was when he told me this story. He did not offer any explanation, no speculation about ghosts, no attempts to rationalize it. Just the facts. One of the gifts, he said, we still have a small, intricately carved wooden sled. On the sled is a painting of a man who looks eerily like my father, pulling two children, clearly meant to be me and my sister. The sled's appearance became even more haunting in hindsight. My father revealed we received it 8 months to a year before my mother passed away from cancer. The painting felt like a cruel premonition of what was to come. Years later, I asked my father about the story again. He denied ever telling me. I pressed him, but he refused to discuss it, his expression distant and unreadable. To this day, I wonder if the house held something unnatural, something that knew more about us than it should. I am searching for that sled now. If I find it, I will post a picture. But a part of me dreads what I might uncover.
Story 2. Midnight Child.
I worked at a public pool, and my shifts were always late, usually alone after hours when it was quiet and still. My job was to clean the building and maintain the pool, making sure everything was spotless for the next day. One night, around 2 a.m., I was cleaning the change rooms. The pool had been closed for 4 hours by that time, and the building was empty, just me, the echo of my footsteps, and the hum of the lights. It was then I heard something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The sound of a child's laughter echoed through the empty building, followed by the unmistakable sound of bare feet slapping against the cold tile of the pool deck. My heart dropped. I froze for a moment, unsure of what I had just heard. I quickly left the change rooms and went out to the pool deck, scanning the area. There was no sign of anyone. The doors were all securely locked. The lights flickered overhead, and there was no movement. No children, no footsteps, nothing. I looked around, trying to find some explanation, but there was nowhere a child could be hiding. The pool deck was dry, no wet footprints marking the ground. I hurriedly checked the doors again, confirming that they were locked tight. and then turned to the security monitors. No signs of any activity. I was the only one in the building. But the sound, the laughter, the running feet, nothing made sense. I can't explain what happened that night. It was unsettling, the kind of unease that stays with you long after you've left. Maybe it was a trick of the mind, or maybe something else was there with me. But I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps echoing through the empty pool deck.
Story 3. Whisper on the Couch.
When I was in my late 20s, I was dating my girlfriend, who would soon become my wife. We had been together for a while and had developed a deep connection. One summer on July 3rd, tragedy struck. My girlfriend's sister was abducted and killed by a group of 6 men. The entire family was left shattered. All the men responsible were eventually caught and tried, but the emotional toll on the family was unimaginable. The trials, followed by the grief and trauma, left them in a state of devastation for years. 3 months passed, and the family was still struggling with the aftermath of the tragedy. The funeral was behind them, but the pain lingered like an unshakable shadow. One day, I arrived at my girlfriend's house to wait for her to get off from her job as a nurse at a local hospital. Her parents weren't home, leaving me alone in the house. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I made my way into the family room, turned on the television, and sat down on the couch. I was hoping to unwind a bit before my girlfriend arrived. The soft hum of the television filled the otherwise silent room. The house felt still, peaceful in its own way. I tried to distract myself, watching the show, but something felt off. As I sat there, I suddenly heard it, a voice clear and unmistakable in my right ear. The voice was soft but distinct, like someone whispering just off my shoulder. My name. It was unmistakably her voice, my girlfriend's sister. The same voice I had heard countless times in the past, before the tragedy had turned everything upside down. For a moment I froze, the blood in my veins running cold. My body tensed, and I turned quickly to look at the seat next to me, expecting to see her sitting there. But there was nothing. The spot beside me was empty, as it should have been. I stared at that empty seat for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt as if the air in the room had thickened, pressing in on me. I glanced around the room, but the silence was overwhelming. There was no explanation for what had just happened. No rational reason that could make sense of it. It was as if the voice had come from beyond, an echo of something lost, a whisper from the grave. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts raced as the unease settled into my bones. The room suddenly felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. My mind screamed at me to stay calm, but the chill in the air and the eerie quiet made it almost impossible to think clearly. I tried to push the unsettling feeling aside, but I couldn't shake the voice. So real, so present. After a few moments, I stood up quickly, my body trembling slightly from the sudden surge of fear. I turned off the television, the remote feeling heavy in my hand, and I walked toward the front door. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a welcome relief. I stood on the porch, taking deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. I glanced back at the house, the silence still pressing in from within. But it was just me out there, standing in the quiet night. No one else. No explanation. only a chilling whisper that would haunt me for years to come.
Story 4. Watching Me.
When I was between the ages of 10 and 14, I suffered from terrible insomnia. It wasn't just the inability to sleep. It was the constant feeling that I was being watched, as though there was something lurking in the shadows. I never admitted this to anyone, but the feeling was suffocating. To cope, I started sleeping on the couch with my back pressed against the wall, always with the TV or some sort of light on. The sensation of being watched never left me. Insomnia took a toll on my life. I missed so much school that my mom eventually decided to take me to a neurologist. After running some tests, the doctor diagnosed me with a few things, but the most bizarre part came during my sleep study. I slept perfectly well there, no issues at all, and I was even in a real bed, not the couch I was accustomed to. It didn't make sense. Things took a darker turn when I was transferred to a children's hospital. During my appointment, I explained to the doctor that I would often see things while I was awake and feel uncomfortable in my own home. At first, they assumed I was experiencing sleep paralysis, a condition that can cause vivid hallucinations during sleep. But when they told my mom, she went pale. She pulled me aside later and, with a shaking voice, explained that she had been experiencing the exact same things, seeing the same images and feeling the same eerie presence. That night, she approached my brother and asked broad questions like, "Have you ever felt or seen anything strange in the house?" It was then that I realized my family had been living with something otherworldly. My brother described exactly what I had been seeing. It was all the same. It dawned on me. We had paranormal activity in our home. What I had been feeling, what I had been seeing was not just a figment of my imagination. It was real. It was terrifying. When we eventually moved out of that house, my sleep issues suddenly stopped. The strange visions, the feeling of being watched, they all went away. I haven't experienced anything like that since. But I'll never forget the chilling truth that came to light that night. I've believed in paranormal activity ever since.
Story 5. The Dead Speak.
My girlfriend's grandfather had passed away, and his ashes were placed on a small shelf in the living room, right next to a heavy, solid angel statue. One weekend, my girlfriend and I were on the couch in the living room, just hanging out, when something absolutely chilling happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the angel statue fly off the wall. And I'm not talking about it just falling. I mean, it launched off the wall with force, soaring about 7 to 8 feet into the air before crashing onto the hardwood floor. It left a dent in the wood where the wing hit. The way it moved was completely unnatural. If it had fallen, it would have dropped straight down, but this thing flew. I froze, staring at the spot where the statue had once been. My heart raced as I turned to my girlfriend, whispering, "Did you hear that grunt?" She looked just as shocked as I felt, and confirmed that she had heard it too. Both of us, terrified, decided to leave for the day. We couldn't get out of there fast enough. That evening, we had dinner with her parents. We told them what had happened, but left out the more intimate details of our day. As we spoke, my girlfriend's younger sister suddenly burst into tears. She confessed that she had seen a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed for the past few nights, but hadn't wanted to say anything because she didn't want to seem crazy. She mentioned that their grandfather had struggled with severe mental health issues that caused a lot of pain before he passed. After hearing her sister's story, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had just witnessed something impossible, and now it seemed like the house was filled with an unsettling presence. That was the moment I became a true believer in the supernatural.
Story 6. My daughter spoke to spirits.
My wife and I swear that. Our daughter used to talk to ghosts when she was a toddler. At the time, she was our only child. And what she said, especially at such a young age, left us both chilled. The first instance I remember was when she told me she was talking to Nana. I had never talked about my grandmother, who had passed away 15 years before my daughter was born. Naturally, I was taken aback. To test her, I showed her a picture of several women from our family and asked who she was speaking to. Without missing a beat, she pointed to Nana. How could she know? I thought maybe it was just a coincidence, but it felt wrong. Then, several months later, my wife and I were trying for a second baby. When my wife got pregnant, our daughter did something even stranger. She sat next to my wife on the couch, placed her head on her stomach, and said, "Mummy, there's a baby in there." I thought it was a guess, or maybe she overheard us talking, but there was no mistaking the certainty in her voice. But then, my wife miscarried. In the midst of our grief, our daughter again placed her head on her mother's stomach and said, "Mummy, there's no baby in there anymore." How could she know that? It was as if she was connected to something beyond the living. Months later, after another miscarriage, our daughter came to us again with an even more chilling statement. She said, "I was talking to my brother last night, and he said that my sister is coming to live with me soon. She was an only child at the time and had no brother, at least not that we knew of. We hadn't even tried to conceive at that point. Later that evening, we took a pregnancy test. It was positive." Now, as the months passed, we learned we were having a girl. But long before we knew, our daughter had already told us what we would have. And we were left to wonder how she knew so much about the things we had yet to learn ourselves. It was as if she could communicate with something or someone that existed beyond our understanding.
Story 7. Strange footsteps.
I was always skeptical about ghosts, mostly because there was no concrete scientific evidence to support their existence. I was also going through a phase of questioning my beliefs about religion and the afterlife. But everything changed when my family moved into an old farmhouse when I was 12. The house was ancient, built around the time of the Civil War. The original owner's name still marked the old barn in the back. And during renovations, we discovered several old antiques hidden within the wall. At first, nothing major happened, just a few odd things here and there. But by the time I turned 16, strange occurrences started happening to me. And it wasn't until my sister also turned 16 that the weirdness started affecting her as well. The most vivid memory I have happened one night when I was sitting on my bed watching TV. I clearly heard my sister walking up the stairs. You could hear every step in that house, the creaks getting louder as someone approached the top. I heard her enter her room and lie down, so I called out to her. But when she didn't answer, I went into her room, only to find it completely empty. My heart dropped. I knew I had heard her. I called downstairs, and to my surprise, she had been downstairs the whole time. We never felt directly threatened by whatever was in the house, but it was clear that this entity seemed to favor targeting the women. Even my mom, who didn't believe in ghosts at all, had to admit that something odd had happened on more than one occasion. One of the strangest yet somehow amusing things occurred while I was doing the dishes. Out of nowhere, I felt a tug at my ponytail, as if someone had yanked it. It startled me, but then I couldn't help but laugh. Of all the things for this entity to do, it was playing with my hair. But even though I found it funny, the fact that it was happening at all sent a chill down my spine. In the end, we never figured out who or what was haunting that old house, but it definitely made us believe that something unexplainable was out there.
Story 8. The Swinging Ghost.
In high school, I worked at a place that hosted kids' birthday parties. It was a large gym that also hosted gymnastics and dance classes. One day I walked in to find one of the girls I worked with someone who was very spiritual, looking completely rattled. She had taught the morning gymnastics class, and during it, one of the kids had been staring up at the ceiling. When she asked the child what he was doing, he calmly replied, "There's a little boy up there," pointing directly at the ceiling. At first we all brushed it off. Kids say strange things sometimes, right? But things got much creepier later. Two of the girls who were working the birthday party before mine came out of the gym, visibly shaken. They told us about a bizarre incident. A pair of 5-year-old twins had just gone down the slide, and after landing, they froze and stared up at the ceiling. Then, in unison, they said, "There's a little boy up there." By now, we were all starting to get uneasy. We went into the gym to inspect the ceiling, half expecting to find something unusual. But it was just the same grey, featureless, warehouse-style ceiling, nothing out of the ordinary at all. Still, we were all a little freaked out. During my party, I was pushing a little boy on the giant swing we had in the gym. While I was watching him swing, he suddenly stopped, staring up at the ceiling, and to my face he said, "Hey, there's a little boy up there." We couldn't ignore it any longer. 3 separate kids, each from different classes and parties, had all seen the same thing. The same little boy staring down from the ceiling. The next day, during our downtime between parties, there was nobody in the gym. We had cameras in the gym so that parents could watch their children play from the lobby. My manager called us out of the break room. "Guys, check this out," he said, his voice tense. We all crowded around the monitor, watching the screen. It was showing the gym completely empty. But then, something caught our eyes. The giant swing, which had been perfectly still when we left, was slowly swinging back and forth. No one was there. The gym was completely empty. We all stood frozen, staring at the screen, our blood running cold. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just a coincidence. There was something in that gym, something that had been watching us and playing with us. I like to think that the ghost was a little boy who just wanted to play. Maybe he finally got to go on the swing. But I can't help but wonder, was he truly just playing? Or was he waiting for something more?
Story 9. Ghostly Voice.
Most of my family is extremely religious and believes in ghosts wholeheartedly. Most of them have claimed to have seen something paranormal at some point in their lives. I wasn't very religious, and I always thought to myself, if I haven't seen it, then it's not real. That changed during my senior year in high school. I was dog-sitting at my great-aunt's house while she was out of town for a few days. A little after midnight, I was watching a movie and my aunt's dog started barking like crazy. and ran up the stairs at full speed. The dog was small but fierce. Suddenly, I clearly heard a gravelly voice at the top of the stairs say, "Bad doggy." The voice was deep and masculine. I went upstairs because I was certain nobody else was supposed to be there. I looked around and there was nobody in sight. The dog was still barking at something that I couldn't see. She was just barking at an empty hallway. That's when I heard footsteps walking away from us down the hall and into my aunt's bedroom. I could hear the footsteps, but I couldn't see anybody making them. I immediately left the house with the dog and went outside to my car. The dog and I slept there for the night. I'm not entirely sure what I experienced that night, but I definitely believe in the paranormal now. I never told my aunt about what happened, but apparently my great-uncle, her husband, had died in that house a few months after I was born. I never knew him, but I'm willing to bet that it was him who I heard that night.
Story 10. Lurked behind me.
Until my mid-20s, I didn't believe in ghosts. I thought most ghost stories were just imagination or wishful thinking. But then something happened that made me question everything. In my early 20s, my spouse and I had to move quickly for his job, and we found an old house that had once been a beach cottage. I loved the idea of living near the beach, with lots of trees and a quiet neighborhood. The house was small, with a big room, a kitchen, and a separate bedroom, all very open and airy. It seemed perfect. However, something about the landlord felt off. He insisted we sign a 1-year lease, stressing repeatedly that we couldn't break it under any circumstances. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the constant reminder seemed odd. At first, everything was fine. I enjoyed the peace and quiet, spending my days reading, watching TV, and even learning to knit. But after a couple of months, I started to feel uneasy. It began as a strange sensation of someone watching me while I was reading or knitting. It only happened when I was alone in the house, and I started to sit with my back to the wall or in the bedroom to avoid the feeling. Things began to disappear or shift in the main room. My handbag and keys were always missing, and I'd spend several minutes searching for them. Then one day I came home to find my knitting yarn tangled around all the furniture in the room. It wasn't just a little bit. The yarn was wrapped around the legs of chairs and stretched across the entire room. I thought my spouse was playing a prank on me, but he never admitted to it. When my sister came to visit, she slept on the pull-out sofa in the main room. The next morning she seemed anxious and left early, saying she wasn't feeling well. Later she confessed to me that she had seen strange things. In the middle of the night, she heard footsteps approaching her, even though no one was there. The windows began opening and closing by themselves, one after the other. Then she heard footsteps walking over her bed and out the side door into the kitchen. She spent the rest of the night on the porch and refused to stay another night. I tried to brush it off as a vivid dream, but soon after I experienced something I couldn't explain. One morning, I went to the kitchen to cook and opened the cabinets. The dishes were all rearranged neat and orderly, but completely on the wrong shelves. Glasses were where the plates should have been, and bowls were where the glasses usually went. I checked all the locks. Everything was secure. No one could have entered without us knowing. I didn't want to acknowledge what had happened, so I pretended nothing was out of place. But that was the breaking point. I told my spouse I no longer felt comfortable in that house. Without question, he agreed we should move. We packed up and called the landlord, who came to pick up the keys without asking a single question. He wouldn't meet our eyes and just stared at the ground. Months later, I asked my spouse if he ever felt strange in that house. He simply replied, "Yeah, that wasn't a good house. Glad we moved." We never spoke about it again.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.